Years of abuse had taught Katie how to survive quietly. But that night, survival required something louder, bolder. So she stood up, crossed the restaurant, and made the most dangerous decision of her life. She needed someone powerful enough to make Jacob back off. So she walked across the restaurant, sat on a stranger's lap, and whispered, "Please help me." Chicago's most dangerous man didn't flinch. He glanced up from his wine, met her eyes, and murmured, "Then you leave with me. Now." The wine glass had shattered against the column just behind her, red streaks sliding down the cream wall like arterial spray. But Katie Harding didn't move. Not this time. Jacob had thrown worse. Shouted louder. And she had flinched for years. But not anymore. "Look at you," Jacob sneered from across the table, voice low and crackling with quiet menace. "You think that dress makes you smarter now? That little paralegal job gives you the right to ignore me." The laughter in the room had died off 10 minutes ago. Conversations around them stalled, forks frozen midair. A few phones were out now, discreetly angled toward the unfolding scene. A waiter hovered by the espresso machine, unsure whether to step in or duck out. Katie's hands shook beneath the table. Her ex's words had changed, but the tone hadn't. It was still about control. Still about breaking her in front of people so he could pretend she was his again. And she'd been stupid to come. Stupid to think an apology dinner at Valerio's was anything but a setup. She caught movement out of the corner of her eye. A man, seated alone. Dark suit, salt and pepper hair, unreadable expression. Watching without watching. He didn't look concerned. He looked like he was calculating something. Cold. Silent. Powerful. Katie made a decision without even standing up. Not the kind you think through. The kind you feel in your bones. She slid from her chair, ignoring Jacob's confusion, and crossed the floor like she was sleepwalking through a fire. No hesitation. No second glance. She placed a hand on the man's shoulder and sank into his lap as if she belonged there. Her mouth close to his ear. Her voice smaller than a breath. "Please, just help me." For one terrifying second, he didn't move. Then his arm circled her waist. And his voice, low, accented, final, changed everything. "Then you leave with me. Now." Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another interesting story. The air outside the restaurant was cool against Katie's flushed skin. She barely noticed the hush that fell over the patio diners or the clink of wine glasses that abruptly stilled as she and the suited man walked out together. His hand remained firm on her lower back, steady, protective, not possessive, but still carrying a warning of strength. Behind them, Jacob didn't follow. Not yet. A black SUV was already idling at the curb, doors opened by men in suits who hadn't been anywhere near the table inside, but had clearly been watching all along. Federico Dellucci said nothing as he helped her into the back seat. Katie slid across the leather interior, unsure where to put her hands, unsure what to say. One of the guards nodded to the driver, who pulled into traffic without a word. The city lights stretched out in silence. Katie could feel her pulse in her wrists, her neck, even in her knees. Federico's gaze remained out the window, his expression unreadable, not angry, not curious, just still. Like he'd done this before. Like he'd watched women fall apart and learned to wait until the quiet settled before speaking. "I didn't know what else to do," she said finally, her voice breaking the silence like a stone in glass. "I didn't know who you were. I just needed." "You needed out," he said, eyes still on the passing skyline. "I understood. But you." "I don't need your reasons," he added, calmly but firmly. "I just need to know if that man is going to keep coming for you." Katie's breath caught. That man. As if Jacob was a problem to be measured, not a person to be feared. "He's persistent," she said. "We dated for a while. When I left, it didn't go well. He doesn't like, no." Federico finally looked at her. It was a simple thing, a shift in his attention, but it felt like someone had moved the ground beneath her feet. "He hurt you?" he asked, not softly, but without judgment. Katie nodded. She didn't say more because she didn't need to. There was something in the way Federico studied her face, like he'd seen damage before and didn't need to press for the gory details. The SUV turned down her street, the old familiarity of her neighborhood jarring after the velvet and blood tension of Valerio's. The driver didn't ask for her address. Of course not. Katie suspected he already knew it, which raised more questions than she was ready to ask. She glanced at the suited man beside her and realized, with a chill, that she still didn't even know his name. One of the guards opened the door as the car slowed in front of her building. Federico stepped out first, then turned to help her down. She hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, she didn't, but because her knees weren't entirely on speaking terms with her brain yet. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at her apartment building, then back to her. "This place has no security," he said. "The fire escape's accessible from the alley. 3rd floor." She blinked. "How do you?" "I notice things," he replied. "Especially when someone's about to step into the line of fire." He leaned closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his breath, warm and steady, like the eye of a storm. "You're safe, for now," he said. "But that man will talk. And others will listen." Katie's stomach turned. "What does that mean?" she asked. But he was already turning away. The SUV's door shut with a soft thud. By the time she made it to the lobby door, the vehicle had already disappeared into the night. Katie leaned against the elevator wall and let her head fall back. The silence was loud now, pressing into her ears like altitude. Her heart hadn't slowed since she crossed the restaurant. Federico Dellucci. That's what the guard had called him when he opened the car door. She hadn't heard of him exactly, not in the front-page news kind of way. But Delluccis were a name that made people lower their voices in Chicago. Not tech-rich. Not politician famous. Old-world powerful. The kind of power that came with rumors and security convoys and whispers behind closed doors. And she had just sat on his lap like a scared girl in a movie, and he had let her. She locked the apartment door behind her, slid every bolt, and pulled the chain tight. Then she dropped her bag and kicked off her heels like she could kick the entire night away. Her phone buzzed with 6 messages. 2 from Jacob. 3 from unknown numbers. 1 from a blocked caller. She didn't open any of them. She just stood in the middle of her small living room, shaking until the adrenaline wore off and the ache of reality crept in. The couch looked too soft. The floor too cold. She curled up on the carpet like a child and let her head rest against the leg of the coffee table. She hadn't cried at dinner. She hadn't cried in the car. But now, in the dark, in the quiet, her body betrayed her. It wasn't sobbing, not loud or wet or dramatic. It was silent. Heavy. The kind of crying that didn't make noise because it was too old, too familiar. When she woke, it was morning. Her phone lay beside her with a dead battery and a cracked screen from where it had slid off the coffee table in the night. She plugged it in without looking at the texts. Her head pounded. Her face felt swollen. Her first coherent thought was, "I have work." By the time she walked into the office at 9:05, she was in flats, slacks, and a clean blouse, hair pinned, makeup minimal, smile hollow. She was going to pretend everything was fine. That was what she was good at. That was her superpower. "Katie," said Tanya from HR, standing by the kitchenette with a look that was way too eager. "Was that you in that photo? At Valerio's last night?" Katie's stomach dipped. "What photo?" she asked. Tanya turned her phone around. It was all over Twitter. Instagram. Even the Sun-Times blog had picked it up. "Mystery woman sits on Mafia boss's lap at Valerio's, chaos ensues." The image was grainy but unmistakable. Katie's back arched as she leaned into Federico, her eyes wide, his arm already around her waist, Jacob standing a few feet behind them, frozen mid-rage. "Oh my God," Katie whispered. "You were trending for like 2 hours," Tanya chirped, already forgetting her coffee. "You look kind of amazing, though. Like a spy or something." Katie slipped into the bathroom and locked the stall. Her hands trembled. Her mouth felt dry. This couldn't be happening. She thought maybe, the night would stay a secret. Just a strange moment with a stranger. Just a whispered choice. But now it was online. Now it had a caption. Now the world was watching. Her phone buzzed again. A new number. He knows where you live. No name. No reply option. No emoji, no link. Just words. Katie bolted out of the stall, splashed cold water on her face, and stared at herself in the mirror. Then she did the only thing that made sense. She left. She didn't even grab her bag. Back on the street, she walked fast, cutting through alleys and dodging stoplights. The city felt different now, like it was turning its face away from her. She didn't head home. She didn't go back to the office. She just walked until her legs burned, until her chest heaved. Then she saw it. Parked on the opposite side of the street, barely noticeable unless you were looking. A black SUV. Engine off. Windows tinted. But it looked familiar. Too familiar. Katie didn't hesitate. She stepped into traffic, ignoring the horns, and approached the passenger window. It rolled down halfway. The man inside didn't speak, but he was the same one who'd opened Federico's door last night. She bent down. "I need to talk to him," she said. The man reached for his phone. Then he looked at her with something like amusement and opened the back door. "Get in." Federico Dellucci didn't seem surprised to see her. He was sitting at a desk in a glass-walled room on the top floor of a sleek mid-rise, not a castle, not a compound, just businesslike. He didn't smile. Didn't rise. Just looked at her the way someone looks at weather radar before a storm. "You came," he said. Katie stepped inside. "They know where I live. They texted me. I don't know how they got my number." Federico nodded once. "They're not after your number. They're after mine. You're a message." "What kind of message?" "The kind that starts a war." Katie didn't sleep. Not really. Her apartment, once her cocoon of quiet, now felt like a trap. Every creak of the floor above, every rustle of the wind outside her window, every hum of passing traffic made her nerves jump. She'd pulled the couch against the door after midnight, like that would stop anything. Morning came in shades of anxiety. Her phone had recharged overnight and buzzed with a vengeance the moment it hit 7 a.m. Dozens of missed calls. Over 50 text messages, most from unknown numbers, many from burner accounts. But one stood out more than the rest. "Jacob. He can't protect you forever. You know that, right?" Katie sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the message like it might ignite. The words weren't dramatic, no curses, no violence, but the quiet smugness wrapped around them was worse. She knew that tone. That cold, tight confidence that always came before he escalated. She should have blocked him again. She didn't. She opened Instagram out of habit and immediately regretted it. Her Explore page was flooded with reposts from the previous night, photos, blurry videos, conspiracy reels. Hashtags ranged from hashtag Mafia date to hashtag Bellario scandal to hashtag Who is she? People were dissecting her dress. Her eyes. Federico's expression. Strangers were trying to find her name. Then one user posted it. Her name. Her job. Her apartment neighborhood. A chain reaction began. By 10:45 a.m., she had 4 voicemails from reporters asking for comment and 3 messages from numbers claiming to just want the truth. Katie panicked and called the police. She explained everything, the harassment, the threats, the masked men at her door last year, the post-dinner text. The dispatcher took her report like someone reading from a script. "We'll log it, ma'am." No patrol showed up. No one called back. When she called again that afternoon, the officer on duty sounded distracted. "Have you considered changing your number?" he offered. Katie hung up before she started screaming. No one believed her. And worse, they didn't care. At 5:12 p.m., she spotted the first car. Parked across the street, engine idling. Tinted windows, same SUV as the one from before, but this one didn't leave. An hour later, another appeared near the alley. Same style. Same silent posture. Her apartment's windows were small, but she could see just enough from behind the curtain. And she could feel it. Like being watched through glass. Her gut told her it wasn't the Dellucci men this time. Katie didn't bother to cook. She had no appetite. Every time she crossed the living room, she imagined someone watching through a rifle scope. At 9:47 p.m., She heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the usual neighborly ones. These were heavy, slow, purposeful. She reached for the baseball bat she kept under the couch. It was a leftover from when Jacob first started showing up uninvited after they broke up. She had never actually needed it until now. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. Katie's heart pounded. No knock. No voice. Just silence. Then a scraping sound. Metal. Something being worked in the lock. Panic seized her. She ran to the kitchen, her fingers fumbling with her phone. She didn't even get to dial. The moment she reached the end of the hallway, she heard a pop, then the door burst inward. Wood splintered. Her chain lock snapped like a twig. Two men in black masks stepped through, fast and brutal. Katie screamed and threw the first thing she could grab, a coffee mug. It shattered against one man's shoulder, buying her 2 seconds. She bolted toward the fire escape. But a third figure was already blocking the kitchen window. Big, silent, gloved hands reaching. She turned to run, but the first man caught her arm. "Come quietly," he growled, muffled by the mask. "This isn't personal." That was a lie. This was absolutely personal. Katie kicked, bit, clawed. Her voice cracked with another scream as the second man lunged toward her. Then came the gunshot. Not from inside. From the hallway. A masked man stumbled back, blood blooming across his sleeve. Before she could process it, the front door crashed open again, this time by force from the outside. Two men in suits swept in like shadows moving through light. The first tackled the intruder holding Katie and slammed him into the wall. The second drew a gun and fired once, clean, efficient. The masked figure at the kitchen window vanished into the alley like a ghost. Katie collapsed against the cabinet, her whole body shaking. One of the suited men knelt beside her. He didn't touch her, just looked her in the eyes. "Miss Harding." She nodded. "Mr. Dellucci told us to watch the building, in case Jacob talked." The other man secured the door, dragging the unconscious attacker into the hallway and pressing a hand to his earpiece. "We need pickup. 2 down. 1 escaped. Target is safe." Katie couldn't speak. Her pulse was everywhere, in her neck, her tongue, her fingertips. The man in front of her, salt and pepper hair, military posture, looked almost bored. But his tone was respectful, measured. "You're safe now," he said. The words didn't feel real, but they helped. Federico arrived 9 minutes later. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't knock. He stepped through the broken door with 2 more men behind him, his suit still perfectly pressed, his presence undeniable. Katie hadn't cried since they left Valerio's. But now, with him there, her guard cracked. He didn't rush to comfort her. Didn't say it's over. He just looked at the blood on her floor, the dent in the wall, the bullet casing near the kitchen threshold. Then he turned to the man beside him and said, "Burn everything. Scrub the cameras. I want them buried." Katie stood slowly. Her legs ached from crouching. Her voice was rough. "You said I'd be safe." Federico's gaze shifted to her, sharp, but not cruel. "You were." His eyes dropped to her hands. "You're still breathing." "Because I prepared for the worst." She wanted to scream, to collapse, to thank him. But all that came out was, "Why?" Federico stepped forward. Close, but still respectful of her space. "Because that man," he said, gesturing toward the unconscious attacker being dragged out, "wasn't here for revenge. He was here to deliver a message. One that only makes sense if they think you matter to me." Katie blinked. "Do I?" The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. But not a lie either. "You do now." She looked around at her apartment, now ruined. Her door half off the hinges. Her photos knocked from the walls. Her sanctuary defiled. She nodded. "Once. Then I'm done here." Federico extended a hand. This time, she took it without hesitation. "If you were Katie, would you have trusted Federico after what happened, or gone into hiding alone? Let us know what you would have done in the comments. If you're hooked and want to see how Katie survives the world she just stepped into, make sure to subscribe. It only gets deeper from here. The gates loomed like the jaws of some ancient predator, tall and black and crowned in cold iron. They parted for Federico's SUV without a sound, and Katie watched as they closed behind her like a final decision. Beyond them, the Dellucci estate stretched across manicured acres, quiet, pristine, and terrifying. It wasn't the size that struck her, or the wealth carved into stone and wood. It was the silence, the kind that came from power being enforced without needing to be spoken. Federico hadn't said a word during the drive. He hadn't scolded her, hadn't comforted her, hadn't questioned her decision to leave her apartment behind. He just told her to get in the car and nodded once when she did. Now, as the SUV curved up the circular driveway, Katie felt the weight of the building watching her back. Windows reflected the setting sun like eyes behind dark glasses, unreadable, unmoved. The front doors opened before they reached them, revealing two men in suits and a woman in black slacks and a white blouse. The woman, early 60s, silver hair tied back tight, gave Katie a once-over that felt like a courtroom verdict. Not cruel, but not kind either. Federico stepped ahead and nodded to the group. "Mrs. Rosa handles the house. She'll show you to your room." The word room hit like a splinter. She wasn't a guest. That much was clear from the body language around her, the tension in the guard's shoulders, the tight professionalism in Mrs. Rosa's nod. Katie followed her through high-ceilinged corridors lined with art she couldn't name and rugs she couldn't afford. The floors were marble, the air lightly scented with jasmine and money. The entire place felt like a museum someone dared you to touch. Mrs. Rosa led her to the second floor, down a hall with a row of identical doors. "This is the East Wing," she said without looking back. "Guest quarters. You'll find appropriate clothing in the closet and personal care items in the bathroom. Dinner is at 7. We observe formality at the table." Then she handed Katie a sleek black keycard and walked away without another word. Katie stood there alone, heart thudding, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, wondering what fresh mistake she'd just made. She opened the door to her assigned room and found herself in what looked like a high-end hotel suite, four-poster bed, velvet armchair, walk-in closet, and a bathtub the size of her entire apartment kitchen. It should have felt luxurious. It felt like a cage with gold trim. She closed the door, locked it, then locked it again for good measure. Her eyes scanned the ceiling automatically, checking for cameras, even though she had no idea what to look for. The closet held designer clothes, all her size. That fact sent a chill down her spine. Someone had guessed or investigated. She sank onto the edge of the bed, ran her hands over the smooth coverlet, and exhaled. Maybe this was better than the apartment. Maybe. But her gut, trained over years of surviving Jacob's manipulations, told her something else. She wasn't safe. She was contained. At 7 on the dot, she followed voices and found the dining room by instinct and subtle paranoia. The space was as cold and immaculate as the rest of the house, a long mahogany table, high-backed chairs, candelabras that looked antique, and no laughter. Federico sat at the head, flanked by two men she didn't recognize and one she had seen whispering near the entrance earlier, tall, mid-40s, charcoal suit, expression like carved granite. As Katie stepped into the doorway, his eyes fixed on her. "Miss Harding," Federico said evenly. "This is Angelo Moretti, my consigliere." Angelo didn't stand, didn't smile, didn't blink. "You made quite the entrance," he said, voice like cold wine poured over gravel. Katie nodded, unsure what to say. She sat near the middle of the table, as far from everyone as she could without looking timid. The food was elegant, but she barely tasted it. Conversation was minimal, guarded. She noticed the way the others glanced at Angelo before speaking, and the way Federico said little, but always observed. When dinner ended, the others left without ceremony. Only Federico remained seated as Katie stood. "Thank you for the meal," she said quietly. He nodded, then said, "The East Wing has its own lounge. You don't need permission to walk the grounds, but don't go beyond the gardens at night." Katie's stomach clenched. It was polite phrasing for a rule, not a suggestion. She was being given a sandbox to stay inside, and she knew enough about control to know the difference. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed that felt too wide and too soft, eyes fixed on the ornate ceiling, trying to ignore the creaks in the walls and the fact that her door had no deadbolt, just that sleek little card slot. At 1:13 a.m., she gave up and wandered to the hallway, her bare feet silent against the rug. She made her way to the East Wing lounge Federico mentioned, more curious than tired. The room was dim, filled with leather chairs, a massive fireplace, and an empty bar. She was about to turn around when she heard voices quiet but close. Male. Tense. She stepped toward the hallway behind the lounge and stopped just short of the open door. "I'm telling you," a voice said, "Angelo. She's not some scared civilian. She shows up out of nowhere at Valerio's of all places, and now she's living inside our walls." "She didn't even know who Federico was," another man replied. "That's what she says," Angelo snapped. "I've seen this play before. The Vitalis are getting smarter. They send in someone soft. Someone broken. Someone who looks like a victim, and by the time we realize she's not, it's already too late." Katie's lungs stopped moving. Her body locked in place like it had back when Jacob used to accuse her of things she hadn't done. She backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. When she reached her room, she sat on the floor with her back against the door and stayed there until her legs went numb. The next morning, the staff avoided her. Not rudely, just efficiently. The cook didn't make eye contact. A woman polishing the floors changed direction when Katie entered the hall. It was subtle, but it was real. She tried to leave. She grabbed her bag and walked to the front entrance, where two guards stood without speaking. "I'd like to step out," she said. One of them tapped his earpiece, waited, then looked back at her. "Gates are locked for the day. Mr. Dellucci's orders." Katie didn't argue. She turned back inside, her chest tight with something worse than fear, the realization that she'd traded one kind of trap for another. The apartment may have been unsafe, but it had been hers. This? This was borrowed safety at someone else's mercy. Later that afternoon, she ran into Federico in the garden. He was seated on a stone bench, speaking Italian into his phone. He ended the call as she approached. "You heard Angelo last night," he said. Not a question. Katie met his eyes. "So I'm a threat now?" "You're an unknown," he replied. "And unknowns get people killed." Her jaw tightened. "Then why bring me here?" "Because dead girls don't answer questions," he said. "And if they thought you were mine, they wouldn't kill you. Not right away." Katie didn't flinch. "So I'm a bluff." "You were," he said. "Until someone took the bait. Now you're something else." "What?" Federico stood. "A problem. And a test." She wanted to scream. Instead, she turned and walked back to the house. Behind her, she heard him say softly, "Prove them wrong, Katie." Katie found Federico alone in the library just after noon, seated behind a desk that looked like it belonged to a king. He didn't look surprised when she walked in. He didn't even glance up from the file he was reading. But the moment she stopped in front of his desk, he closed it and folded his hands, patient, unreadable. It was maddening. "I know what your people think of me," Katie said, the words sharper than she intended. "I know they think I'm bait. That I'm lying." She kept her voice level, her eyes on his. "But if I were here to hurt you, wouldn't I have done it already?" Federico didn't move for a long beat. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her like someone trying to solve a puzzle without touching the pieces. "You think this is about trust?" he asked. "It's not." She frowned. "Then what is it about?" "Risk," he replied. "Everything in this house, in this life, comes down to measuring risk. And unknowns are always the highest risk." Katie's spine straightened. "I'm not an unknown," she said. "I've told you everything I know." He nodded once. "And I've heard you. But we live in a world where truth and manipulation often look the same. Where pawns don't always know they're on the board." His gaze didn't soften. "So if you want to prove you don't work for the Vitalis, stay. Watch. Listen." Katie exhaled. It wasn't a request. It was an invitation to survive, with conditions. Federico didn't want an explanation. He wanted evidence. And she intended to give it to him. The shift started subtly. Katie began walking the halls at different times of day, memorizing the house's patterns. She noticed which guards rotated at which posts, which ones were always paired together, and which ones avoided looking her in the eye. She watched how the kitchen operated, who received deliveries, who signed invoices, and who always seemed to be in the wrong place at the right time. No one paid much attention to her. They thought she was bored. Or aimless. But Katie wasn't aimless. She was alert. The same instincts that kept her sane through 3 years of Jacob's manipulation were kicking in now. She read silences like dialogue. She followed tension like footsteps. It was on the 4th day that she noticed Matteo. He was a quiet guard. Mid-30s. Always polite, never chatty. But Katie started realizing that Matteo's patrol schedule never matched what she overheard in the lounge from Marco, the security chief. Twice, she passed him stationed at a corridor he shouldn't have been covering. She mentioned it to Rosa in passing, nothing accusatory, just casual curiosity. "Matteo's always near the East Wing, huh?" she asked. Rosa's pause was almost imperceptible, but Katie saw it. "He moves around," was all she said. That night, Katie started keeping a handwritten log. The next pattern emerged in the kitchen. Deliveries were typically signed for by Antonio, a burly man with a cheerful laugh and a temperamental knee brace. But every Wednesday, without fail, he left early. And every Wednesday, a younger staff member named Luca would take over the inventory log. Luca was friendly, too friendly, Katie thought. Especially for someone in a household that treated her like a walking virus. He always smiled at her. Always tried to spark conversation. And he never quite answered questions directly. She started spending time in the East Wing lounge again, sometimes reading, sometimes pretending to nap. What she really did was listen. Voices carried in old houses. Conversations floated under doors. And more than once, she heard Matteo and Luca talking behind the closed service corridor, their tones hushed and urgent. One evening, she followed Matteo from a safe distance as he moved through the hallway outside her room. He was carrying something under his jacket, something flat and rectangular. Instead of heading toward the armory or security office, he veered down a narrow corridor that led to the garden utility shed. She waited, hidden in the alcove near the laundry chute. 10 minutes later, he emerged empty-handed. Katie didn't sleep that night. Her brain spun through scenarios, secret communications, planted evidence, rerouted deliveries. She considered telling Federico immediately, but instinct told her to wait. If she came with half a suspicion and no proof, she'd be labeled paranoid, or worse, manipulative. Instead, she found Marco. He was Federico's head of security, gruff but intelligent, the kind of man who didn't blink unless it was tactical. She approached him while he was reviewing surveillance footage in the control room. "I think one of your men is either lazy or lying," she said. Marco glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "Which one?" "Matteo." He didn't laugh. Didn't scoff. Just paused the feed and turned to face her. "Go on." Katie told him everything: Matteo's shifts, Luca's deliveries, the Wednesday switch, the garden shed, the item under his jacket. Marco listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood. "Don't tell anyone else," he said. "Not even Federico." "Why?" "Because if you're right, they'll run. And if you're wrong," he looked at her, "we'll all know soon enough." Katie spent the next day in a haze of adrenaline. Marco didn't report back. Federico didn't mention anything. But the energy in the estate shifted. Guards changed rotations midday. The kitchen was unusually quiet. Rosa avoided eye contact. That night, Federico summoned her to his office. It was the first time she'd been in there, all dark wood and backlit shelves, the kind of room that felt built for negotiations and war. Federico stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit lawn. "You were right," he said. Katie's heart stuttered. "About Matteo?" Federico turned to face her. "And Luca. They've been feeding updates to a contact in the city. Drop points in the garden. Communication routed through food deliveries." Her breath caught. "For how long?" "Long enough to put this house at risk," he said. "And long enough to make you a convenient scapegoat if they were ever caught." She didn't know whether to feel vindicated or violated. The idea that she'd been walking through a minefield, unaware, while someone planned her fall from the inside, it was dizzying. Federico approached her desk and placed a file in front of her. Marco intercepted a package this morning meant for the Vitali contact. It had a photo of you. Your schedule. Times you were alone in the house. Katie's throat tightened. They were going to make it look like you were the leak, he finished. Angelo still thinks you might be. She looked up at him. Do you? Federico didn't answer right away. Then he said, you could have run. But instead, you stayed. You paid attention. He stepped closer. You didn't just clear your name, Katie. You protected mine. Something flickered between them, something not quite trust, not quite understanding, but built on the bones of both. And Katie realized in that moment, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was playing the game. If you were in Katie's position, would you have exposed Matteo right away or waited to collect more proof like she did? Let us know your answer in the comments below and subscribe to follow Katie's next move inside the Dellucci empire. Katie woke the next morning to a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The house was quieter than usual, a kind of watchful quiet that made the air heavy. From her window, she could see two guards she didn't recognize posted near the garden gates, scanning the perimeter. Someone had shifted the security pattern overnight. The calm before a storm, she thought. She dressed quickly, choosing something simple but professional, a soft gray sweater and dark jeans. There were eyes everywhere in this house, and Katie had learned that blending in was safer than trying to impress. When she entered the kitchen, the staff froze mid-motion, like her presence was a warning sign. Even Rosa's polite efficiency felt forced. Katie gave a small nod and took her coffee to go. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Marco. The man's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharper than usual, restless. Federico's been asking for you, he said, keeping his voice low. About Matteo. Katie's pulse quickened. What about him? Marco didn't answer, only gestured for her to follow. He led her to the security office, a narrow, steel-lined room filled with monitors and blinking lights. The screens showed live feeds of the estate, the gates, hallways, driveways, and the vast courtyard where no one lingered long. On the desk, a series of shift logs were open. Marco topped one. You were right again. Katie leaned in. The digital schedule for guard rotations looked ordinary, but Marco zoomed in on the change history. The entries had been edited, subtle tweaks, a few minutes here and there, one guard replaced by another. Matteo's been doing it for weeks, Marco said. Always at times that line up with supply deliveries. Her breath caught. You checked the deliveries? He nodded. Every one of them cross-referenced with a private vendor. But one name stands out. He pulled up a separate file. The vendor company, Rivera Imports. Katie frowned. I thought the Rivera family was neutral. Marco smirked without humor. They were. Until the Vitales bought them out last year. The realization hit like a cold slap. Matteo wasn't just careless, he was a conduit. He's been passing information through deliveries, Katie whispered. Drop points hidden in the shipment logs. Routes, times, maybe even security footage. Marco nodded grimly. And he's been paid for it. By the time Federico arrived, the tension in the room could have cracked glass. He was dressed in black again, no tie, sleeves rolled up, his expression a wall of composure hiding something dangerous underneath. Show me, he said simply. Marco replayed the security feed of Matteo walking to the back gate during an off-shift hour, exchanging a small envelope with a man unloading a van marked with the Rivera logo. The video was short, blurry, but damning. Federico's jaw tightened. Katie stood silent, watching his reaction. Federico didn't raise his voice or lash out. He just stared at the screen, then exhaled through his nose, a quiet, terrifying sound. Bring him in, he said. 2 guards left the room immediately. Katie had seen anger before. Jacob's anger was loud, dramatic, meant to scare. Federico's was quiet, contained. The kind of fury that planned before it struck. They didn't wait long. Matteo was dragged in minutes later, wrists bound behind him. He looked smaller than usual, pale and sweating. Boss, he started, but Federico's look silenced him. You've been altering my security logs, Federico said evenly. Passing notes through deliveries. Who's paying you? Matteo's throat bobbed. It's not what you think, boss, I swear. Federico's voice stayed calm. Then tell me what it is. They said it was just information, harmless. Shift changes, delivery schedules. Who? Federico pressed. Matteo hesitated. Vitalis. Through a guy named Jacob Ashton. Katie froze. Her heart stuttered at the name. Jacob, again. Always Jacob. Even when she thought she'd left him behind, he managed to slither back in like smoke through cracks. Matteo must have seen the shock on her face, because he turned toward her, desperate. He said you'd vouch for me. Said you'd want to help him make things right. Her stomach turned. You spoke to him, she asked quietly. When? A few weeks back. He found me in the city, said he had a deal for me. Said the Dellucci ruined his life, and he could pay me double what I make here if I passed along simple information. Nothing big. Just numbers. His voice cracked. I swear I didn't know it would go this far. Federico's tone didn't change, but his words cut clean. And you believed him? Matteo looked down. I was stupid. I just needed the money. My brother. Your brother doesn't matter, Federico interrupted coldly. What you've done endangers every life under this roof. His gaze flicked to Marco. Take him downstairs. Matteo flinched, panic rising. Boss, please. Federico didn't look at him again. Marco, you know what to do. Two guards hauled Matteo from the room, his protests fading into the hall. Katie stood frozen, the reality of Jacob's involvement hitting harder with every second. She wasn't sure if she wanted to scream or collapse. Federico turned to her, his voice quieter now, but still edged with control. I suppose you didn't know about this. Of course I didn't, she said, her voice shaking despite herself. I haven't spoken to Jacob since the night I left him. I didn't even know where he was. Federico watched her carefully, studying every micro-expression. She met his eyes and didn't look away. You think I'd survive this long with him breathing down my neck if I was helping him? The silence stretched until it snapped. Then, finally, he nodded. No, he said. You wouldn't. His tone softened just enough to feel like a reprieve. You were right about Matteo. You've been right twice now. That earns something. Katie felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't praise, but it was close enough. Federico moved closer, not threateningly, just enough to bridge the distance between suspicion and acknowledgement. You trust patterns, he said. That's what makes you useful. Her lips twitched. I thought I was a liability. You were, he replied. Now you're an asset. Marco returned 20 minutes later, wiping his hands on a handkerchief, expression grim. He talked, he said. Federico didn't ask what had been done to make that happen. And? Matteo's confession came out in fragments. The Vitalis hadn't just wanted information, they wanted exposure. They'd planned to use Jacob's connection to Katie to bait Federico into the public eye. The attack at her apartment had been just a warning shot. Katie's blood ran cold. So all of this, me, the restaurant, the attack, was planned? Marco nodded. Matteo said they called it the invitation. A setup meant to draw Mr. Dellucci out where cameras could see him. Federico's eyes darkened. They wanted a spectacle. Marco hesitated. It's not over. Matteo said there's one more move coming. A gala. Federico's gaze sharpened. What gala? The Rossetti Foundation event, Marco said. Next week. You were invited personally, high donors, press, half the city's elite. Matteo said the Vitalis planned to hit it hard. They'll make it look like a rival assassination. Federico's jaw clenched. And they'll make me the villain. Katie's mind spun. You can't go, she said. It's a trap. I have to, he replied. Not going would prove them right, that I'm scared, that I'm weak. The Vitalis feed on perception. She stepped closer. Then take precautions. Extra guards. Reinforced exits. He almost smiled. You think I haven't planned for that? Then let me help. He paused at that. You said I'm an asset now. Use me. Federico studied her again, really looked at her this time, not like a pawn, but like someone standing on the same board. You want to help me catch them? No, Katie said. I want to stop them before they catch you. The room went silent again, the weight of her words settling like fog. Federico nodded once, decisive. Then you'll come to the gala. You'll stay in my line of sight the entire time. No exceptions. Katie's heart jumped. You want me there? I want the Vitalis to think they still have leverage, he said. That you're still the bait. But this time, we'll be the ones holding the line. Katie swallowed, nerves and resolve colliding in her chest. And if they see through it? Federico's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, more a promise. Then they'll finally understand who they're dealing with. She believed him. For the first time since the night at Bellerio's, she wasn't just reacting, she was preparing. And even though fear still gripped the edges of her thoughts, something else began to bloom in its place. Trust. Dangerous, reckless trust. Outside the window, the estate lights flickered in the dusk, casting long shadows across the garden. Somewhere beyond those gates, enemies were moving their pieces across the board. But inside, for the first time, Katie didn't feel like prey. She felt like part of the hunt. Katie had never worn a dress like this before, midnight navy, backless, subtle shimmer, like the reflection of stars on dark water. It had arrived in a black garment bag that morning, with no note, but she didn't need one to know it was from Federico. The fit was perfect. Of course it was. Someone had measured her, or simply knew her size from one glance, and somehow, that was more unnerving. She stared at herself in the mirror, trying to recognize the woman she'd become. Not the receptionist. Not the scared girl whispering "help me" in a restaurant. Tonight, she looked like someone important. Someone who belonged. But her hands still trembled when she clipped in her earrings. Federico met her at the base of the stairs just after 7. He wore a black tuxedo with the kind of quiet confidence men didn't need to earn. They were born into it, or inherited it through blood and fear. His eyes scanned her once, expression unreadable, and then he simply said, "You clean up well." Katie arched a brow. "Is that your version of a compliment?" "You'll know when I give you one," he replied, then offered his arm. They left in a bulletproof SUV with a 4-car escort. Marco sat in the front seat, checking every block like the city itself might betray them. Katie clutched a tiny clutch bag that held nothing but a burner phone and a tracking device Federico insisted she carry. She hadn't asked what happened if she got separated. She already knew the answer wasn't "call 911." The Rossetti Foundation Gala was held at a historic art museum downtown, all glass and marble, soaked in uplighting and lined with velvet ropes. Security outside was tight, but not tight enough to make anyone nervous. The guest list included billionaires, socialites, and just enough politicians to keep the night legitimate. Cameras flashed in waves. The press didn't know exactly who Federico was, not officially, but they knew, and that meant whispers followed them all the way up the steps. Inside, the air buzzed with money and secrets. Champagne flowed in crystal flutes. A string quartet played something classical in the background, and every conversation hovered just above a whisper. Katie's heels clicked on the polished floor, her posture tall but alert. Her eyes scanned every corner, every face, every movement that didn't fit. If this was a trap, it would be dressed in satin. Federico remained at her side, speaking quietly to donors, diplomats, and at least one judge who avoided eye contact. He wasn't warm, but he was charismatic enough to hold court, not enough to invite questions. Katie said little, smiling when appropriate, nodding when expected. But her eyes were never still. She was watching. Near the 30-minute mark, she caught it, a black sedan parked just beyond the front circle, engine on, but never moving. Valet cars arrived in waves, headlights flashing, but this one didn't belong. It faced the building directly, not angled for pickup or drop-off. Its windows were tinted darker than city regulations allowed. And it hadn't moved once since they arrived. Katie leaned toward Federico. "That car's facing the entrance," she said, her voice low. "That's not valet behavior." He didn't look, but his jaw tightened. "You're sure?" She nodded. "It hasn't budged." He turned toward Marco, who was standing near the entrance with 2 other guards, pretending to watch the crowd. One look was all it took. Marco raised a hand to his earpiece. Katie's skin prickled. Her instincts screamed louder now. Something was off. Wrong. Then the driver's side door opened. Katie's stomach dropped. 4 men stepped out of the car in unison, moving too fast, too direct. No hesitation. Coats stiff with shape, hiding weapons. Her mouth opened, but the words came too late. Gunfire erupted. The first shot shattered the entrance glass. Screams tore through the lobby like a wave. Guests dropped champagne, ducked, ran. Federico grabbed Katie's arm and yanked her behind a marble column just as a second round hit the display behind them, exploding glass and ceramic into the air. Marco's men were already firing back. Security scrambled, some drawing weapons, some diving for cover. Katie's ears rang from the concussive blasts, her breath shallow. She grabbed Federico's hand and pulled him low, guiding him behind an overturned table where one of the catering staff had just fled. "This way," she shouted, spotting the service corridor past the champagne tower. He followed without hesitation, crouching beside her as they ran. Another blast tore through the wall beside them. The floor was chaos, broken glass, blood, a man yelling into a radio in a language Katie didn't recognize. She didn't stop. She didn't think. She moved. They reached the service hallway, and Marco was already there, shouting orders into a mic. "Exit clear, vehicles 2 blocks south, secure route confirmed." One of the attackers had breached the lobby by then, gun raised. Marco shot him twice without blinking. Federico shoved Katie forward. "Go." They burst through the kitchen, past terrified staff, out a back entrance flanked by guards in tactical gear. Another SUV waited, doors open, engine hot. Katie climbed in just as the driver peeled away from the curb. Federico slid in beside her, breathing hard, his hand bleeding at the wrist from a grazing bullet. The moment the door shut, Katie collapsed against the seat, her chest heaving. "You were right," Federico said, his voice hoarse but calm. She turned to him, eyes wide. "You're bleeding." He looked down, almost surprised. "It's nothing." Katie reached for a cloth from the medkit under the seat, pressing it to the wound. The SUV swerved onto a side street, tires screeching, another vehicle flanking them tight. Marco's voice crackled through the front radio. 2 down, 2 escaped. Confirming cleanup crew." Federico winced, but didn't pull away from her touch. He looked at her, really looked, and there was something new in his eyes. Not fear. Not gratitude. Something quieter. Weightier. "You saved my life," he said. She swallowed, her fingers stained red. "You've saved mine enough times. Consider us even." He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "No," he said. "We're not even." Back at the estate, the guards flanked them all the way to the main doors. The house buzzed with urgency, more personnel, more movement, no silence. Federico was ushered toward the medical wing, but he waved them off. "It's a scratch," he insisted. Marco gave Katie a long look, then nodded once, respect, maybe. Or realization. Rosa met her at the base of the stairs, her usually stern face drawn tight with concern. "You're not injured?" she asked. "No," Katie said. "But it wasn't luck." Rosa didn't respond, but for the first time, she didn't look through her. She looked at her. Upstairs, Katie sat on the edge of her bed, dress torn at the hem, blood still on her wrists. Her reflection in the mirror didn't look elegant anymore. She looked like someone who'd run through gunfire. Like someone who'd chosen to stay in the path of danger. A knock came at her door just after midnight. She opened it to find Federico, his arm freshly bandaged, his tie gone, shirt sleeves rolled up. "You saw it before my men did," he said. "That car. That pattern." She nodded slowly. "You taught me to pay attention." He stepped inside, standing a few feet away. "Tonight, they expected you to run. To be a shield. Instead, you were the reason I'm still alive." Katie met his gaze. "So what happens now?" Federico was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Now they know you're not just bait." He took one step closer. "You're a weapon." Katie didn't know whether to feel terrified or proud. So she settled for both. And when Federico finally turned to leave, he added only one thing before the door closed behind him: "They won't underestimate you again. Neither will we." The gala's aftermath was a quiet storm, the kind that rearranged the ground beneath your feet. Federico's estate went into lockdown, but not in panic. It was surgical. Controlled. Everyone knew the attack hadn't just been an act of aggression, it had been a message. Marco doubled the guard rotations. Schedules were rewritten. Every communication channel was scrubbed, every shipment re-verified. Federico moved with relentless purpose, calm on the outside, but Katie saw the weight building behind his eyes. He wasn't shaken. He was sharpening. The first break came 2 nights later. Federico's men picked up Jacob Ashton outside a warehouse on the south side, trying to flee with a suitcase full of unmarked bills and a burner phone he hadn't bothered to wipe. He didn't go down fighting. He folded the moment Federico's men slammed him into a chair and turned on the overhead light. Katie wasn't in the room, but she heard the tape. "Look," Jacob stammered, voice cracking through static, "it wasn't me. I didn't plan this. I just delivered things. Messages. Cash." Federico's voice stayed flat. "Who gave the orders?" There was a pause. Then the name dropped like a bullet. "Emilio." Katie stood outside the interrogation room, breath caught. Emilio Dellucci, Federico's cousin. She remembered him from her second night at the estate. He had that easy charm and practiced smile, the kind of man who hugged you without ever touching you. She remembered thinking his politeness felt rehearsed. Inside the room, Jacob kept talking. "He said you were slipping, that you were getting soft. That Katie was the perfect excuse to draw you out. He knew you wouldn't stay hidden once she sat on your lap in that restaurant. He said you'd react like clockwork." Katie's throat tightened. Federico's entire empire had been manipulated into exposing itself, by blood. By someone who knew exactly how he thought. Her instincts hadn't failed her. But even she hadn't seen this coming. Federico exited the room 10 minutes later, his face unreadable. "Where is he?" he asked Marco. "Downtown loft," Marco answered. Same place he used to run low-level meetings from. Quiet. No staff. Federico nodded once. "Bring him." They captured Emilio just after sunrise. No struggle. No gun drawn. He smiled the entire time like it was all a misunderstanding. Like betrayal was just a bad business deal waiting to be renegotiated. Katie stood in the great room when they brought him in. The staff had cleared out. Marco and 2 guards flanked the entryway, and Federico stood at the head of the room like a judge prepared to pass sentence. Emilio didn't look afraid. If anything, he looked disappointed. "I thought you'd come yourself," he said to Federico, brushing off imaginary dust. "You wanted me out of hiding," Federico said, voice like steel. "You got what you wanted." Emilio chuckled. "I got caught. There's a difference." Katie watched the 2 men, family by blood, strangers by war. The tension between them was thick enough to bend time. She saw the betrayal hit deeper than business. This wasn't just empire versus empire. This was personal. Federico walked forward slowly. "Why?" he asked. "You had everything. Power. Access. My trust. You call this power?" Emilio snapped, his mask cracking. "Living behind walls, protecting strangers, letting weakness in the front door?" He shot Katie a look, not even subtle. "You let her change you. You made this house soft. Vulnerable." Katie's fists clenched at her sides. Federico didn't react. Not to the insult. Not to the venom. He just looked at Emilio and said, "I gave you everything. And you sold it for what?" "A seat at the Vitalis table." Emilio sneered. "A future. The one you were too blinded to see coming." Marco stepped forward, gun in hand. "Say the word, boss." The room held its breath. Federico's eyes didn't move from his cousin. "You worked with the men who tried to kill me. You fed them my movements. You put her in the crosshairs." "She put herself there," Emilio said coldly. "You let her." Katie stepped forward. "He didn't let me do anything. I made a choice. Just like you did." Emilio laughed, cruel and hollow. "And look how that turned out." Federico didn't blink. He reached under his jacket and pulled out his own pistol, slow, calm. He aimed it at Emilio's chest, and for the first time, Katie saw real fear crack through the man's eyes. But before he pulled the trigger, Katie placed her hand on Federico's arm. "Don't," she said, soft but steady. He looked at her, jaw locked. "He deserves it," he said. "I know," she whispered. "But if you become him, you lose everything." Silence fell. Federico's hand didn't waver, not right away. But something in his gaze shifted. Slowly, he lowered the gun. Marco didn't speak. Neither did Emilio. "Strip him of everything," Federico said, his voice flat. "Take his money, his access, his protection. He leaves Chicago tonight. If he comes back," he looked at Emilio directly, "you die." 2 guards moved in. Emilio didn't struggle, but the smugness was gone. He didn't look at Katie again. He didn't say another word. They dragged him out of the room, down the marble hallway, into silence. Katie exhaled, the tension draining from her in waves. Federico stood motionless. Then he turned, eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "That was your call," he said. "I could have ended it." "You still did," she replied. "Just without blood on your hands." He looked at her for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. "You're not just observing anymore," he said. "You're shaping this." Katie didn't know what to say. So she said nothing. But something between them shifted, something neither of them named. Trust. Or something deeper. That night, Federico didn't join dinner. Katie sat with Marco and 2 other guards, the tension lower, the energy different. When she passed Rosa in the hall, the older woman nodded at her, not stiff, not wary, but something closer to respect. She wasn't just tolerated now. She was part of this place. She found Federico in the study just after midnight, staring into a glass of dark whiskey untouched. He didn't look at her when she entered. "He taught me to ride a bike," he said. "I crashed into a stone wall and cracked 2 ribs. He told me never to let go of the handlebars." Katie sat across from him. "What changed?" she asked. Federico's voice was quiet. "I became the one with the bike. And he wanted the handlebars." Katie didn't respond. She let the silence stretch, let it breathe. Then she said, "You made the right call." "Only because you stopped me," he replied. "And if you hadn't?" He looked up at her finally. "I don't know." Katie met his gaze. "That's why you need someone who can see what you can't." His mouth twitched. "You volunteering?" "I already did." Something between them settled, not soft, but sure. Not romantic, but intimate. Not love, not yet. But loyalty. Chosen, not inherited. Outside the study, the estate was still. Guards patrolled the gates. Lights flickered gently in the garden. And somewhere beyond the walls, the Vitales had lost their greatest ally. Katie knew they'd strike again. But next time, they'd find a house united, not crumbling. And a woman who was no longer just a guest in the lion's den. If someone betrayed your family from the inside, would you choose revenge or exile? Let us know your answer in the comments, and subscribe to follow Katie as she steps deeper into power, danger, and everything in between. It started small. Katie noticed it first in the kitchen, a delivery from a company she hadn't seen before. Then another, this time marked under a different name, same handwriting on the manifest. Rosa said they were substitutions, last-minute changes from vendors dealing with inventory issues. But Katie's gut, the one that never lied, told her it was something else. The guard rotations were tighter, but the house itself had relaxed since Emilio's exile. Federico had loosened internal protocols just slightly, a gesture of calm after weeks of tension. But to Katie, it felt like exposed skin. The air was just a little too still. The timing too perfect. She brought it to Marco that afternoon, laying out a chart she'd been building in her room. Fake companies, irregular delivery times, entry point overlaps. Marco studied it with a frown. "You're saying someone's staging something?" Katie nodded. "I don't know how or when, but something's coming. Soon." Marco didn't argue. He went straight to Federico. By nightfall, the house was back under lockdown, guards repositioned, silent alarms tested, escape routes double-checked. Federico didn't say, "I told you so." He just met Katie's eyes across the hallway and gave a short nod. The kind that meant you were right again. That night, the sky was clear, moon-high, wind low. Too quiet. Katie couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the treetops sway beyond the estate walls, waiting for the storm she knew was coming. It came at 2:14 a.m. The first explosion tore through the eastern perimeter wall, the one closest to the service gate. A fireball lit the garden, turning shadows into shapes. Alarms blared. Shouting echoed across the estate. Katie was already moving. She grabbed the tablet Federico had given her, linked to the surveillance system she'd studied obsessively, and sprinted for the security room. Guards passed her in the hall, armed and focused. She didn't stop them. She was thinking ahead, calculating angles, routes, vulnerabilities. Marco met her at the entrance to the control room. They've breached the garden. 2 entry points. Possibly 3. Katie shoved the tablet into his hands and pulled up the camera feed. Cut access to the east wing. Lock down the south hallway. They're trying to split us. Marco looked at her, impressed. You're taking command? Someone has to. She keyed into the control panel, bypassing Rosa's credentials. On screen, the attackers moved like professionals, dark clothing, silent comms, formation tight. These weren't freelancers. These were trained. The Vitalis had sent soldiers this time. Where's Federico? She asked. Study, Marco answered. He's coordinating from there. Katie cursed. That's too exposed. He needs to move. Marco hesitated. He won't. Another explosion rocked the east wall. The feed flickered. One camera went black. Katie's hands flew over the console, rerouting power to backup systems. We can't hold the entire house, she muttered. We don't need to, Marco said. Just hold the heart of it. Katie thought fast. Seal the lower corridors. Send 2 guards to the servant stairwells. They'll try to flank us. Redirect 3 teams to the north wing. That's storage, Marco said. Exactly, Katie replied. They'll think it's the panic room. Gunfire erupted outside the western glass doors. Guards returned fire, the house ringing with the sound of war. Katie saw one man go down, then another. Her stomach lurched, but her focus didn't break. If they reach the 2nd floor, reroute them to the library. We trap them there. The next hour blurred. Katie moved like she had been born to do this, issuing orders, rerouting defenses, tracking every camera feed, and coordinating with Marco and Federico by radio. Federico was hit in the arm, a clean shot, but deep. Marco said he refused medical attention until the breach was contained. Typical. By 3:46 a.m., the attack slowed. 3 of the attackers were down, 1 captured. The rest retreated into the night, disappearing into the trees, but not before setting 2 fires in the garden and disabling 2 vehicles. The estate held. Barely. But it held. Katie slumped against the wall outside the control room, her heart pounding in her ears. Her dress shirt was torn, hands stained with ash and sweat. She wasn't injured, just exhausted. Every nerve in her body still on alert. But the worst had passed. Marco appeared a few minutes later. He wants to see you, he said. Katie pushed off the wall. How bad? He'll live, Marco said. Thanks to you. She found Federico in the study, the same room where he had once nearly killed his cousin. Now, blood soaked his left sleeve, and a medic worked quickly beside him. He waved the man away as Katie entered. I said I'm fine, he muttered. You're not, Katie replied. But you're breathing, so I'll take the win. Federico looked up at her. His eyes were tired, but focused. You did more than hold the line tonight. Katie shrugged, still catching her breath. I just used what I learned. No, he said, sitting straighter. You led. They listened to you. Marco followed your calls. And this house, he paused, exhaling, this house is still standing because of you. Katie swallowed, emotion catching her by surprise. She wasn't used to praise. Not the real kind. Not from men like him. I wasn't sure we'd survive. Federico nodded. We survived because you trusted your instincts. Again. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, the pressure grounding. You're not a guest anymore, Katie. His voice dropped lower, quieter. You're my partner. She blinked. Not protected. Not passenger. Partner. The word didn't just land, it rooted. Deep. Real. In the hallway, the house had begun to settle. Rosa organized the staff, the remaining guards shifted into post-siege protocols, and Marco moved with calculated efficiency. The place smelled of smoke and gunpowder. But it stood. Katie stepped outside just as the first light of morning bled across the horizon. The garden was scorched. The wall was cracked. But the house behind her still held its spine. And so did she. The game had changed. Whatever the Vitalis thought they were walking into, they hadn't expected this. A woman they once tried to use had now become the one leading the charge. Katie didn't feel like a pawn anymore. She felt like power. 2 weeks passed, and the house no longer felt like it was bracing for war. The shattered glass had been swept up, the walls repaired, the garden replanted. Quiet returned, not the uneasy silence that came before a storm, but something steadier earned. Guards still patrolled, but they did so with purpose, not paranoia. Katie walked the halls now without flinching. The estate felt different because she was different. The staff no longer watched her with suspicion. They greeted her by name. Rosa left coffee outside her door each morning, and even Marco had stopped double-checking her clearance. She was no longer tolerated, she was trusted. Emilio had vanished. Word was he left the country within hours of his exile and hadn't made a sound since. Whether fear or shame kept him quiet, Katie didn't know. She didn't care. He had chosen his side, and Federico had let him live barely. The Vitalis were quieter too. Their remaining networks in Chicago had started to fracture. Some folded, others cut deals, a few simply disappeared. It wasn't victory, not entirely, but it was balance. For the first time since Katie had stepped into this world, no one was hunting her. She spent her mornings helping Rosa in the kitchen, her afternoons in the surveillance room with Marco, and her evenings reading alone in the East Wing lounge. Federico had gone back to long meetings, closed doors, whispered conferences behind tinted glass. But he always found time, a glance during dinner, a nod across the hall, a single look that said, "I see you." And for Katie, that was enough. Until it wasn't. She packed slowly, folded each item with precision, as though that might make it easier. Her old clothes, the ones she came in with, didn't feel like hers anymore. The navy dress from the gala, the gray sweater from the siege, even the flats Rosa had left in her closet, all of them had memories embedded in the seams. Still, she folded them. She wasn't running. She was returning. Or so she told herself. The estate looked golden in the late afternoon light. The garden fountain trickled softly, the hedges newly trimmed. Repair crews moved quietly around the perimeter, and somewhere in the distance, laughter carried from the kitchen staff. It was peaceful. Uncomfortably so. She found Federico in the garden, where it had all started, just like the night after the ambush. He stood near the roses, sleeves rolled up, jacket tossed on the stone bench beside him. He didn't look surprised to see her. "You're leaving," he said. Katie nodded. "I think it's time." He didn't speak, just watched her, eyes calm but unreadable. "The Vitalis are quiet. You're rebuilding." "I'm not needed here anymore." "And that's why you're leaving?" "Because I'm not needed," she repeated. "No, because I'm not owed." Federico was silent for a moment. Then he stepped closer, his voice even. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." His brow furrowed. "Explain." Katie looked up at him, wind stirring her hair. "Then why do I want to stay?" The words hung there, not a plea, not a challenge. Just a truth. Raw and unpolished. She hadn't planned to say them, but once they were out, she didn't take them back. She couldn't. Federico stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, gently, he stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth between them. He didn't reach for her. Didn't command, didn't offer a deal. Just a whisper. "You're not just safe anymore, you're home." Katie blinked. It wasn't a vow or a contract. It wasn't romantic. But it was real. The most honest thing she'd heard in years. She let the moment settle. Then she smiled, small and certain. "Okay," she said. "Then I'm staying." Federico's eyes flickered with something that almost looked like relief. "By choice." She nodded. "Only choice that's ever really been mine." They walked back to the house together, not holding hands, not touching, just moving side by side. No one said anything as they passed. But the staff noticed. Noted the shift. And it wasn't just respect anymore. It was belonging. That night, dinner was quiet, only Rosa, Marco, Federico, and Katie at the table. There was no toast. No announcement. But when Rosa served dessert, she placed Katie's plate down last, like she was no longer the outsider. And Marco asked her opinion on something security-related, casually, naturally. Like she'd always been in the room. Afterward, Katie returned to the lounge. The fireplace crackled low. Her old paperback sat where she'd left it, but she didn't open it. Instead, she looked out the window. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the grass. But none of them scared her anymore. A knock came at the door. She didn't need to ask who it was. Federico stepped inside, hands in his pockets, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm still adjusting," she admitted. "To calm. To peace." He nodded, then joined her by the window. "It doesn't last forever," he said. "But while it's here, you should take it." Katie turned toward him. "I've never had peace that wasn't conditional. You do now." His voice was steady. "As long as you want it." She looked at him, this man who had once been a stranger, a threat, a shield. Now he was none of those things. And yet, all of them. He was the first person who hadn't asked her to prove she was worth saving. He had just saved her. And then asked her what she wanted next. "I don't know what I want," she said finally. "But I know I want to figure it out, here." Federico's smile was barely there, but it was real. "Then we start with that." They stood together, silent, steady, and for the first time in years, unafraid. Katie didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The Vitales might return. Another threat might rise. But she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't fate. She wasn't protected. She was partner. She was home. If you listened to this story until the very end, thank you. We have a playlist of interesting stories like this. See it on your top right screen. Enjoy!